Listen to this quote. "I'm not sure the state of MMA judging has ever been worse, quite frankly." End quote. No, those aren't my words. Those are the words of UFC play-by-play commentator John Anik. And every so often, we're reminded why by some of these controversial scorecards as to why this judging is so poor. That was the case a few weeks ago on back-to-back nights at Bellator 289 and UFC 282, with a huge spotlight on longtime judge Doug Crosby. Since all this went down, some commissions have reacted by pledging to review scorecards with the judges involved and also placing travel restrictions to judges who want to work on consecutive nights. The wounds are still fresh for many, I'm sure. What else do you want to see done by the commissions in 2023? Do you have any personal ideas on how to improve judging? Nolan, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily, here's the thing. I wouldn't say that judging as a whole is worse than it's ever been, but I think both the amount of fights that are happening and the amount that people are paying attention have certainly pushed judging towards the forefront of the public discussions often. I think that when you start to have such a high quantity of fights, you start to really see the holes that are exposed, not only in the systemic portions of the judging, you know, what judges weigh their criteria, did they get it right, did they read into that right and wrong, but also kind of the larger scale functionality of the commissions and, you know, assigning judges to certain roles and what kind of, you know, holding people accountable, what kind of policies are there, and enforcing, you know, judges education, certain things like this, I think also have been brought up quite often. And I don't think that we'll ever hit a point in time where judging is perfect. I mean, as long as humans are judging fights, I don't know if they'll ever be able to have some sort of AI that judges fights, hopefully not. But as long as humans are judging fights, I think that there will be human error. And that's not to belittle the issue at hand. I think that it is a major issue, especially when you have fighters whose paychecks are riding on the fact that three individuals that are sitting cage side get it right. If anybody has been to a live event, they know how difficult it is to sometimes score from cage side when you have one angle and you're looking at a fight. So I think there are certain things that can be implemented that would certainly help. I think that, you know, accountability, making sure that if a judge has a bad scorecard, even if the final outcome is right, that might show that the system is working. If the right person wins, maybe it's a split. But if there's one egregious scorecard, I think it definitely should be addressed with the judge. I think if you start to see a trend, I'm not saying every judge everybody makes mistakes, right? I've probably written a bad story or two in my day. I've had a bad grammar day. I've had a typo in a headline or whatever. I'm not saying to be cutthroat with these people, but I'm saying if there seems to be a trend where they time after time, even if the scores are as a whole get the winner right, if one judge is continually turning in scorecards that are questionable, I do think that that's when commissions have to reconsider. I appreciate the loyalty. I appreciate them not allowing the public opinion to rule what they're doing. But at the same time, I think it's very vitally important to the sport to not, you know, just kind of say, okay, well, you know, we'll give them another shot, or, well, you know, the judges got it right overall. Sure, that shows the system might be working if the judges get it right, but it shows that the holes aren't being plugged that could potentially lead to bigger problems. So certain things like that. I think there's other things like, you know, making sure judges have monitors or something that show them different angles if they are on the opposite side of the cage or whatever. I think there's certain things like that. I think we can look at, you know, readdressing the scoring system. I think that's a bigger change. That's going to be something that would be very far down the line. I don't know, you know, if people have watched like the certain ABC commission meetings that they do yearly, but I think it's really tough to make big changes like that, to get everybody on board, to get people to back that, right? So that's something that, as much as it sounds nice to say, hey, we can, you know, next year we can talk about this at the ABC meeting and we can change all these things, I think it's going to have to be something that happens over the span of years. So maybe get the ball rolling on that, start thinking about different ways of scoring, start trying them at low-level amateur fights to see if it works. But overall, I mean, I think judging has a lot that needs to change and can improve on, but I also think we got to make sure that we're not exaggerating just how bad it is.
How about this one? What if the judges got show money and then good scorecard bonus, similar to the fighters?
Well,
right?
That's a big part of it too, is that the pay for judges is not great. Like, even if you sit on those commission calls, like the boxing judges and referees get paid significantly more than MMA judges and referees do. I'm not exactly 100% sure why that is, but that's the way that it is. And so for certain policies to be implemented, like these travel restrictions, which I agree with to a certain degree, just want to make sure that it's not harming the amount of judges and the pool of judges that they're going to have, because I don't think there's a ton of these people to go around. There's a certain amount of events. There's a certain amount of judges that have had high level experience. There's commissions around the United States and beyond that are holding events every weekend. So I think there's just a number of different things in the culture that kind of set it up to fail too. That's like a whole nother level that we could talk about for an hour.
Mm-hmm. All right, Mike Bond, we don't have an hour, but let's hear your thoughts on this topic.
I thoroughly agree with the last point that Nolan made there about the pay. I mean, I know it's been said in some interviews by some fighters. I think Anthony Smith recently did one with Ariel Helwani where he's like, these judges get to sit back with no accountability and their cushy paychecks, and it's like they're not really getting cushy paychecks. Like, it's not something that is a massive motivator. And if you have that dangling over your head, you're losing all this money if you're not doing your job correctly. Maybe that's more of an incentive to do it properly. But talking about judging as a whole, I mean, we're not going to sit here and propose complete overhauls to the system that would take every single commission voting in individually to actually implement, and overhauls to the unified rules and things like that. Like, that's not going to happen anytime soon. So we have to focus on what can we do here and now to try to impact judging in a beneficial way. And I think it mostly comes down to accountability, right? Like, we need these people to be held accountable to the scorecards they're putting out there. They shouldn't just be able to dip in the back door, judge a couple fights, maybe give in some questionable cards, and then get out of there without talking to anyone. And I've said this a few times now, perhaps even on this platform already, like covering the NBA, as I occasionally do. At the end of games, they're allowed to send a pool reporter into the locker rooms, and that's one person that represents the media corp as a whole. They come up with 3 to 5 questions collectively that's maybe on a questionable call at the end of the game, or why this person was thrown out of the game, or a technical foul, whatever it may be. And those referees will give the answer, and they'll be on their way. The media can take that back. They'll all have access to that Q&A, and then they can go forward. And you might not like the answer sometime, you may disagree with it, but at least they're putting forward their thoughts and why they're putting this out there and why they're scoring, making a decision the way they are. And I'd love to hear that the same way from the judges. Maybe you don't need to speak to all 3 of them, but if we could get some sort of explanation or accountability, maybe that would help the greater world understand why they're looking at these fights the way that they do. And the commission, them saying, we're going to talk to Douglas Crosby, we're going to review this fight, like, that's great in theory, but if we don't get to hear anything about it, what does it even matter? If they're all handling it internally, it doesn't benefit the fighters to know what to look for when this person's judging their fight, or the media to understand, or fans, whatever the case may be. So that's something I'd really like to see happen. I don't know how likely it is. Maybe we'll have, some progressive commissions like California be willing to take some of those steps. But right now, I don't have a whole lot of confidence that things are going to change. And that's, hugely disappointing, because everyone in the industry deserves a lot better than to have, not know what you're going into a fight and what you're doing right or wrong, or how this person may be scoring a fight like this. And, when you look back at this year, there's not a ton of like insanely egregious decisions. There's been a lot of other years where it's been a lot worse. We're going to be doing awards coming out for like robbery of the year, and it's a pretty short list. And I think, maybe Paddy Pimblett versus Jared Gordon is up there, and that's pretty much debated over how you went with 1 round. So, like, these fights, as we talked about in the previous topic, the sport is elevating in such a high level that some of these fights are legitimately so close. And that's why I always say, like, a close fight is not a robbery in the majority of cases, but sometimes it is, sometimes it's really bad, but sometimes we're just talking about such thin margins. And that's why, if you want to bring up different types of scoring criteria, the half-point system, different things like that, yeah, we could go into all that. We're not going to here, but like, the way that the system is set up, it's not giving a massive, scale to judge what is a close fight and what is a, relatively close fight or definitively close fight, whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of problems with that. But if I could make, one hope, one push, one plead to the commissions and to the judges, let's just get some more accountability for everyone.
Love it. Great stuff, Mike. And thank you for pointing out that 2022, we did go had long spells of not even bringing up controversial scores or anything like that. But one positive that has come out of what happened the last few weeks is at least we got the commission's attention. All right, how about you guys? What are your thoughts here?
I actually love Mike's idea. I love that happens in other sports, although I'd like to see what happened in the Commanders game because that dude got bear hugged, right? That didn't make any sense.
Interference all the way.
Oh, that was a horrible call. But it would be nice to get answers as to why things were called a certain way. And I think that's a pretty easy fix. Something like that should probably happen. So I love that. But I think that's the point, man, is we've had this conversation every year for like the last 10 years. And I don't know that we felt like there's been much change. So things have to happen. All these things that get thrown out need to start getting debunked, right? Open scoring. We've seen it in Invicta. Okay, let's try something, right? Let's have fighters be judges, although that can have holes poked in it too. They have their biases, right? Some like wrestling, some like Brazilian jiu-jitsu better, some like striking. You're always going to have your problems, but I feel like we need to start implementing things, start trying them. That way we can start weeding out all the things that don't work. One thing that I think Farah Hanoun brought this one up. Well, how about 5 judges instead of 3? You know, I'm starting to warm up to that one a little bit more just because maybe there might be a little room for less error that way. At the same time, you know, why not 8? Why, you know, like, when are we going to put our foot down? We don't want it to look like a lumberjack match, right? Like in WWE, we only want like a couple people out there. I think going from 3 to 5 isn't like that big of a deal. Maybe it could curb some of these things, but really, I like the first step. All right, the travel, I get that. That made sense. I like what Mike said. I think these are just things that can easily be implemented. And I think that's where people's frustration comes, is we don't feel like we're getting answers. And so I think 2023 has to be about trying to provide those answers. Why are things going down the way that they're going down? Give us an explanation. I also want to see more people trained in this, right? We don't really hear too many new names that often. And maybe that's the pressure of why they feel like they have to keep going with some of these certain guys. I don't know, but I would like to see some new names come up through the ranks.
Yeah, and for people that might not be aware, like a lot of these commissions don't allow the referees and judges to talk to us. Like there's been some that we've actually had on this programming that have been punished because they've came and talked to us. So I would like to see, if commissioners aren't comfortable with having their officials speak to the media, at least give out a statement yourself to us. You know, if you're not letting them explain it, how about you explain it? If the system's not broken, or if things are, you know, not necessarily bad, like, let's hear an explanation from someone. So hopefully maybe with this public conversation, if they feel like the criticism's not warranted or it's unfair, like, best way to face that is to face it head on. So I hope that we have more of that in 2023.
And something I'd love to see too, talking about maybe the long term, like there's such a reluctance to implement any sort of experimentation in our sport. Like if the UFC went to the Nevada Commission and say, hey, for this season of The Ultimate Fighter, we want to do open scoring, or we want to try with the half point system. What do you guys think about this? Here's our proposal. We can do this. It's lower level. Some of these fights on tough are exhibition fights. They don't even count toward the record. Let's try something, see how it works out. We can collect a pool of data, and then maybe that's how we move forward to see if something works. But there is such a reluctance to even go outside of the norm to a slight degree, whether it's, you know, from rules to that in the actual fights themselves, to the judging criteria, to things like that, that the wheels of this just burn so slow that I would not be surprised if we're sitting here in 10 years having this exact same conversation, sadly.
Yeah, I threw out Annick's quote, but what's the quote we've always heard? Don't leave it in the hands of the judge. That's probably 30 years old. The sport's almost 30 years old.
And
so
yes, as ridiculous as ever.
We do need to make a move, but I will say this. I'll leave you guys with this, and you guys can check me if I'm wrong. Please do. Until it does improve to the satisfaction of everyone, the onus is on the fighters to more convincingly establish and win their rounds. Otherwise, they may be the ones that have to suffer, because they're the ones that only go home with half of a check, or possibly get cut by the promotion, or possibly retire. You know, and I know I get pushback from some fighters. You don't think we're trying to finish? You don't think we're trying to do this? Well, you know, I'm not saying that you're not, but there are some teams that are really, really good. You know, the old takedown with 30 seconds left actually used to win rounds. And of course, we talk more about damage and what the effectiveness of what you did with the takedown, but there's still I've noticed a lot of ways that fighters can win rounds and win fights They just have to be creative and crafty. It's not it in other sports has happened. I see wide receivers that can draw the interference flag, like what didn't happen in Goza's Commanders game. I've seen people flop in basketball to get certain calls. I've seen people in soccer, same thing. You know, they'll pretend like an elbow was worse than it was and maybe get a yellow card. MMA fighters, I think, need to get a little bit smarter in their strategies, until this gets fixed, because they're the ones that are only going to hurt themselves.